Some secrets are buried so deep they follow you to the grave. Evan Callahan thought he knew his parents, quiet, decent people who lived simple lives in a small Pennsylvania town. But when they both died on the same night, at the same hour, in separate rooms of their house, he knew something was terribly wrong. Hearts don't synchronize their final beats by coincidence. And as Evan stood at their cremation, watching the funeral director nervously close his father's casket, he glimpsed something that would shatter every truth he'd ever believed about his life, a photograph of a child he'd never seen before, clutched in his dead father's hands like a final confession. That photograph was just the beginning. Behind it lay a mystery spanning 27 years, a twin brother he never knew existed, a deadly adoption ring, and a cover-up so devastating that people were still killing to protect it. Now, as Evan races to uncover the truth before his own daughter becomes the next victim, he'll discover that the most dangerous lies are the ones told by the people who loved you most. Some families have skeletons in their closets. Evan's family had a ghost, and that ghost is about to reveal a truth more horrifying than death itself. If you want to see how far this rabbit hole goes and discover the shocking truth that destroyed an entire family, make sure to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and comment below telling us where you're watching from. You won't want to miss what happens next. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday when frost clings to window panes like frozen tears and the sky can't decide whether to snow or just threaten to. Evan Callahan was pouring chocolate milk into his 7-year-old daughter Mia's cereal bowl, her favorite breakfast ritual, the one that made her giggle because it turned the Rice Krispies into a swamp, when his phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize. Millersville, Pennsylvania. His hometown. The place he'd left behind 15 years ago, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a desperate need to become someone his parents might finally be proud of. He almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail. But something in his gut twisted, the way it does when your body knows something terrible before your mind catches up. Mr. Callahan. The voice on the other end was female, professional, the kind of tone that's been trained to deliver bad news without crumbling. This is Officer Janet Reeves with the Millersville Police Department. I'm calling about your parents, Margaret and Thomas Callahan. Evan's hand froze mid-pour. Chocolate milk dripped onto the counter. What about them? Sir, I'm so sorry to inform you that they were both found deceased this morning. A neighbor called when she noticed their newspapers piling up. We entered the residence around 5:30 a.m. The world tilted. Mia was saying something about a cartoon, her voice floating from another dimension entirely. Both of them? How? Officer Reeves cleared her throat, and in that pause, Evan heard something else, uncertainty, maybe even confusion. That's what's unusual, Mr. Callahan. Your father was found in his study. Your mother in the master bedroom. Both appear to have passed around the same time, roughly between midnight and 2 a.m. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of foul play. The coroner is listing it as simultaneous cardiac events, but what? Another pause. It's just highly uncommon for two individuals to experience fatal heart attacks at the exact same time, in separate rooms. We're conducting a full investigation, but I wanted you to know as soon as possible. Evan's legs gave out. He sank into a kitchen chair, the phone pressed so hard against his ear it hurt. His parents. Gone. Together. Simultaneously. Like their hearts had agreed to stop beating in perfect, impossible synchronization. 3 days later, Evan stood in the dim viewing room of Evergreen Memorial Funeral Home, watching snow fall through the frosted windows onto the brown brick buildings of downtown Millersville. The room smelled like lilies and furniture polish, that specific combination that only exists in funeral homes and old churches. Mia was with his ex-wife for the week, thank God for small mercies. He couldn't have explained this to her. Hell, he couldn't explain it to himself. Two closed caskets sat side by side, dark mahogany with brass handles that caught the muted winter light. His mother's casket was draped with white roses. His father's with nothing, Thomas Callahan had specifically stated in his will that he wanted no goddamn flowers. Even in death, the old man was stubborn. Evan had barely slept since the phone call. Questions gnawed at him constantly, relentlessly. His parents were only 63. Relatively healthy. His father still played racquetball at the community center twice a week. His mother had just sent him an email the week before about some historical society meeting. People didn't just sync up their deaths like that. It wasn't natural. It wasn't normal. Mr. Callahan. The funeral director materialized beside him, a thin man named Gerald Hobbs with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like crushed velvet. I wanted to let you know we'll be ready to proceed with the cremation in about 20 minutes. If you'd like a few private moments with your parents first, now would be the time. Evan nodded, not trusting his voice. Gerald squeezed his shoulder with practiced sympathy and retreated, leaving him alone with the caskets and his spiraling thoughts. He approached his father's casket first, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. His hand trembled as he reached for the lid. Gerald had left it unlocked for this exact purpose. One last look, one last goodbye. The brass latch clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud in the silence. Thomas Callahan looked smaller than Evan remembered. Death had a way of doing that, shrinking people down to their most essential selves. His father's face was pale, waxy, his white hair combed neatly back. Someone had dressed him in his navy suit, the one he'd worn to Evan's high school graduation. His hands were folded across his chest in that classic funeral pose, fingers interlaced, wedding ring still on his left hand. But something glinted between those folded hands. Something that didn't belong. Evan leaned closer, his heart suddenly hammering. Tucked between his father's thumb and forefinger was a small photograph, yellowed with age, folded twice into a compact square. It looked like it had been handled many times, the edges worn soft. With hands that shook so badly he could barely control them, Evan reached into the casket and carefully extracted the photograph from his father's grip. The paper felt fragile, like it might disintegrate if he breathed on it wrong. He unfolded it once. Twice. And then his entire world shattered. The photograph showed a small boy, maybe 4 years old, standing in front of a Christmas tree. The tree was covered in those old-fashioned bubble lights his parents used to have, the kind that burbled when they heated up. The boy wore a light blue winter coat with wooden buttons, his blonde hair cut in that generic style every kid had in the 90s. He was smiling, but it wasn't a real smile, it was the kind of smile kids gave when adults told them to say, cheese. Evan had never seen this child before in his entire life. He flipped the photo over with trembling fingers. On the back, in his mother's distinctive handwriting, was a single word, Lucas. Sir. Gerald's voice made Evan jump so violently he nearly dropped the photograph. The funeral director had appeared from nowhere, his face pinched with what looked like panic. I'm sorry, but we really need to close the casket now. The crematorium schedule is very tight today. Wait, who is this? Evan held up the photograph. Do you know who this child is? Gerald's eyes widened. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face, recognition. Fear. But then his professional mask slammed back into place. I have no idea, Mr. Callahan. Perhaps a relative? I don't have any young relatives. I'm an only child. I've never seen this kid before. Then perhaps it's a friend's child, or, Gerald was already moving, already closing the casket lid. The brass hinges creaked as the lid descended, cutting off Evan's view of his father's face. I really must insist we proceed. I'm very sorry for your loss. But Evan wasn't listening. He was staring at the photograph, at this mystery child named Lucas, and his mind was racing. Who was this boy? Why did his father die clutching this photograph? And why did Gerald Hobbs look like he'd just seen a ghost? As Gerald sealed the casket, Evan noticed something else. The inner edge of the casket lid, just visible before it closed completely, bore deep scratch marks in the polished wood. Fresh marks. Marks that looked like someone had dragged their fingernails across the surface from the inside. From the inside. Evan's stomach lurched. That was impossible. His father had been dead for 3 days. Bodies didn't move. Bodies didn't scratch. "Mr. Callahan?" A soft voice came from behind him. Evan turned to see 2 nurses from the local hospice center standing near the entrance, whispering to each other. When they noticed him looking, they fell silent, but not before he caught a fragment of their conversation, heard the neighbors say there were screams. "Excuse me." Evan crossed the room in 3 long strides. "What did you just say?" The older nurse, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, we shouldn't gossip. It's just. Mrs. Henderson from Maple Street mentioned she heard shouting coming from your parents' house the night before it happened." "Shouting? What kind of shouting?" The nurses exchanged glances. The younger one cleared her throat. She said it sounded like an argument. A bad one. She almost called the police, but then it stopped. Evan's pulse thundered in his ears. His parents arguing. Thomas and Margaret Callahan, who'd barely raised their voices at each other in 40 years of marriage. The same parents who'd been so careful, so controlled, so maddeningly calm about everything. He looked down at the photograph still clutched in his hand. The boy in the blue coat stared up at him with that forced smile, frozen in time. Lucas. Who the hell was Lucas? Behind him, Gerald was wheeling his father's casket toward the back room where the crematorium waited. Through the partially open door, Evan could see the massive steel furnace, its mouth gaping open like a dragon ready to consume his father's body and whatever secrets it held. And then something made him look at the wall behind where his mother's casket sat. Someone had carved something into the wallpaper, low down near the baseboard where most people wouldn't notice. Evan crouched down to see it better. 2 words, scratched into the wall with what looked like a fingernail, "Forgive us." The photograph seemed to pulse in his hand, warm and alive, like a beating heart. Evan felt snow melting on his cheeks and realized he was crying without having noticed when he started. His parents were gone. But they'd left him this, a photograph of a child he'd never seen, a name he'd never heard, scratch marks in a casket, and 2 words carved in desperation into a wall. "Forgive us." Forgive them for what? The cremation happened at 2 p.m., and by 2:47, both of Evan's parents had been reduced to ash and bone fragments in metal urns that felt impossibly heavy for what they contained. He'd stood there watching the casket slide into the flames, the photograph of Lucas burning a hole in his jacket pocket, and all he could think was, "What am I missing?" He drove to his parents' house in a daze, the windshield wipers beating a rhythm against the thickening snow. The GPS said it was a 12-minute drive, but Evan couldn't remember any of it. One moment he was pulling out of Evergreen Memorial's parking lot, and the next he was sitting in the driveway of 847, Maple Street, staring at the house he'd grown up in. It looked exactly the same. 2-story colonial, painted cream with dark green shutters. The porch light was still on, casting a yellow glow across the snow-covered lawn. His mother's wind chimes, the ones shaped like hummingbirds, hung motionless in the cold air. Everything was so normal, so mundane, so utterly wrong. The key was under the ceramic frog by the front door, exactly where it had been since 1997. Some things never changed. Except everything had changed, hadn't it? His parents were dead. And somewhere in this house, there had to be answers about the boy in the photograph. Inside, the house was tomb quiet. The heat was still on, set to his mother's preferred 68 degrees. A half-finished crossword puzzle sat on the kitchen table, his father's reading glasses resting on top of it. The coffee maker had a full pot, 3 days old, the liquid inside transformed into something dark and viscous. His mother's favorite cardigan hung over the back of a chair. These small, intimate details of interrupted lives made Evan's chest constrict until he could barely breathe. He started in the obvious places. Photo albums in the living room bookshelf, dozens of pictures of him as a child, awkward school photos and birthday parties, and that one disastrous camping trip where he'd fallen in the lake. But no Lucas. No boy in a blue coat. The master bedroom yielded nothing but the expected: clothes still hanging in closets, his mother's jewelry box with her pearl necklace, his father's collection of mystery novels. It was almost 6 o'clock, the winter darkness pressing against the windows, when Evan finally made his way to the garage. He'd been avoiding it, he realized. The garage had always been his father's domain, that sacred space where Thomas Callahan spent hours working on furniture projects, organizing tools with obsessive precision, and, Evan now understood, apparently hiding secrets. The overhead light flickered when he hit the switch, casting shadows that seemed to crawl across the concrete floor. The garage smelled like motor oil and sawdust, a scent so achingly familiar it made Evan's throat tight. His father's workbench stood against the far wall, tools arranged by size and function. Everything in its place. Everything except the truth. Evan started searching systematically, pulling open drawers, checking behind stored paint cans, running his hands along the pegboard where hammers and screwdrivers hung in perfect rows. Nothing. 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 He was about to give up when his foot caught on something, a slight unevenness in the concrete floor near the back corner, behind a stack of old 2x4s. He pushed the lumber aside and found a small metal box, maybe a foot square, wedged between the wall and an ancient snow blower. The box was dark green, military style, with a combination lock that had rusted around the edges. Evan's hands shook as he pulled it free. It was heavy, something substantial inside. The combination. God, what would his father use? Evan tried his birthday. Nothing. His mother's birthday. Nothing. Their anniversary. The lock didn't budge. He sat back on his heels, frustration and exhaustion warring in his chest. Think, Evan. Think like your father. What mattered to Thomas Callahan? And then it hit him. The address. 847, he spun the dial, 847. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, nestled in what looked like an old t-shirt, was a large manila envelope. The envelope was sealed with tape that had yellowed with age, and across the front, in his mother's handwriting, the same handwriting from the back of the photograph, were 4 words that made Evan's blood run cold. Se ele descobrir, perdonos. If he discovers, forgive us. The words were in Portuguese, his mother's native language, the one she only used when she was deeply upset or didn't want Evan to understand what she was saying. His hands trembled so badly he could barely grip the envelope. Who was he? Evan himself? Or someone else? And what horrible thing required forgiveness? He tore open the envelope with more force than necessary, the sound obscenely loud in the quiet garage. Inside were several documents, all carefully folded. The first thing he pulled out was a birth certificate, but it had been damaged, deliberately, he realized with growing horror. Someone had taken a marker and blacked out the name of the child, pressing so hard the pen had torn through the paper in places. The date of birth was visible, April 23, 1994. The same day as Evan's birthday. His vision blurred. The same birthday. Another child born on the same day as him. Lucas. Underneath the birth certificate was a series of photographs, maybe 6 or 7, all showing the same boy from the first picture. Lucas at different ages, 2 years old on a tricycle, 3 years old at what looked like a birthday party, 4 years old in that blue coat standing in front of the Christmas tree. In every single photograph, Lucas was alone. No other children. No adults visible except for shadows at the edges of frames. But it was the last item in the envelope that destroyed what remained of Evan's composure. A small sock, child-sized, knitted in light blue wool with a pattern of white snowflakes around the cuff. One sock, not a pair. It was old, the yarn fuzzy with age, and near the top someone had embroidered a name in white thread, Lucas. The same blue as the coat in the photograph. The same blue that was starting to feel like a color that meant something terrible. Evan's phone buzzed in his pocket, making him jump. A text from his ex-wife, "Mia wants to FaceTime you before bed. Everything okay?" He stared at the message, at the normalcy of it, and wanted to laugh or scream or both. Everything was not okay. Everything was so profoundly not okay that he didn't even know where to begin explaining it. He typed back, "Give me 30 minutes. Tell her I love her." Then he turned off his phone and sat in a cold garage, surrounded by his father's tools and his parents' secrets, holding a dead child's sock in his hands. The snow had started falling harder, he could hear it pinging against the garage roof. Through the grimy window, he could see Mrs. Henderson's house across the street, lights blazing in every room. The neighbor who'd heard screaming the night his parents died. The neighbor who'd almost called the police but didn't. Evan stood up, legs stiff from sitting on the concrete floor, and carefully returned everything to the metal box except for the sock. That, he kept in his hand, running his thumb over the embroidered name. Lucas. Who were you? Where are you? And why did my parents hide you from me? As he turned to leave the garage, the overhead light flickered again, and in that stuttering illumination, Evan noticed something he'd missed before. On the wall near the door, at about chest height, there were scratches in the paint. Not random scratches, deliberate marks, like someone keeping count. He moved closer, pulling out his phone for the flashlight. 4 vertical lines with a diagonal slash through them. 5 marks. Then another set. And another. 23 sets in total. Someone had been counting something in this garage. Counting days, maybe. Or years. Evan looked down at the sock in his hand, at the carefully stitched name, and felt the foundation of everything he thought he knew about his life begin to crumble. His parents had died screaming at each other in the middle of the night. They'd been cremated clutching a photograph and a desperate plea for forgiveness. And now he was standing in a garage full of ghosts, holding evidence of a child who shouldn't exist. Outside, through the falling snow, he thought he saw movement in one of the upstairs windows of his parents' house. Just a shadow, there and gone. But when he looked directly at it, there was nothing. Just darkness and the reflection of his own terrified face in the glass. Evan didn't sleep that night. He sat at his parents' kitchen table until 3 in the morning, the photographs of Lucas spread out before him like tarot cards promising a future he didn't want to see. The blue sock lay in the center of it all, a tiny piece of evidence that refused to explain itself. When exhaustion finally dragged him under, he dreamed of screaming, his parents' voices echoing through empty rooms, saying words he couldn't quite make out but understood in his bones were terrible. He woke to pale morning light filtering through the kitchen curtains and the sound of someone knocking on the front door. For a disoriented moment, he thought it might be his mother, locked out after her morning walk. Then reality crashed back, heavy and suffocating. Through the front window, he could see Mrs. Henderson standing on the porch, wrapped in a thick burgundy coat, her white hair covered by a plastic rain bonnet even though it had stopped snowing hours ago. She was holding a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil, the universal language of sympathy in small-town America. Evan opened the door, and Mrs. Henderson's weathered face crumpled with concern. "Oh, Evan. I saw your car still here this morning. You poor dear, you must be exhausted." She thrust the casserole into his hands. "It's tuna noodle. Your mother's favorite." "Well, it was." Her voice trailed off, and she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd pulled from her coat pocket. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That's very kind." Evan set the dish on the entry table, his mind racing. This was the neighbor who'd heard the screaming. This was the woman who might have answers. "Would you like to come in? I could make some coffee." She hesitated, glancing past him into the house like she was afraid of what she might find there. "Oh, I shouldn't intrude. You must have so much to do, with the arrangements and everything." "Please," Evan said, and something in his voice must have conveyed his desperation because Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted from sympathetic to wary. "I just I need to ask you something. About the night they died. Mrs. Henderson's hands twisted the tissue into a tight spiral. Evan, I already told the police everything I know. You told them you heard screaming. I need to know exactly what you heard. For a long moment, she stood frozen on the threshold, and Evan thought she might turn and leave. But then she stepped inside, her sensible orthopedic shoes squeaking slightly on the hardwood floor. He led her to the living room, where she perched on the edge of the sofa his mother had reupholstered just last summer. Evan sat across from her in his father's chair, and the wrongness of it, him in his father's spot, his father never coming back, threatened to undo him. He pushed the feeling down and waited. Mrs. Henderson stared at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. It was around 1:30 in the morning. I'd gotten up to use the bathroom. You know how it is when you get older, your bladder doesn't let you sleep through the night anymore. She attempted a weak smile that died almost immediately. I heard raised voices coming from your parents' house. At first, I thought maybe they had the television on too loud. But then I realized it was them. Your mother and father. They were arguing. What were they arguing about? I couldn't make out most of it. The windows were closed, and I was trying not to eavesdrop, you understand. But they were so loud, Evan. I'd never heard your parents fight like that. Not in all the years I've lived here. She twisted the tissue tighter. Your father was shouting something about the truth and he deserves to know. And your mother, she was screaming back that it was too dangerous and we agreed never to speak of it. Evan's heart hammered against his ribs. Did they say what it was? Mrs. Henderson's eyes filled with tears. Your mother said, and I'll never forget this because it chilled me to the bone, she said, we can't bring him back, Thomas. We buried him. We buried him and we buried the truth with him. She looked up at Evan, her face pale. Then it got quiet. So quiet. I waited for maybe 10 minutes, thinking I should check on them, but I was scared. I'm an old woman, Evan. What could I have done? Him. Evan's voice came out strangled. She said, him. Did they say a name? Mrs. Henderson's hands trembled. Once. Just once. Your father shouted it like an accusation, Lucas. And then your mother started crying, these awful, broken sobs. And then, nothing. Silence. The name hung in the air between them like a ghost finally acknowledged. Evan pulled out his phone and showed Mrs. Henderson the photograph of the boy in the blue coat. Is this Lucas? She stared at the image, and all the color drained from her face. Her lips moved silently, and for a terrible moment, Evan thought she might faint. Where did you find this? In my father's casket. Mrs. Henderson, who is this child? Oh God. She pressed the tissue to her mouth. Oh God, I thought, we all thought. Thought what? Please, I need to know. Mrs. Henderson stood abruptly, the movement jerky and panicked. I can't. I shouldn't have said anything. This isn't my place. Evan stood too, blocking her path to the door. Mrs. Henderson, my parents are dead. They died screaming at each other about someone named Lucas. I found his photograph, his birth certificate, his clothes. I need to know who he was. She was shaking now, her entire body trembling like a leaf in a storm. When she spoke, her voice was raw with old grief and fear. You had a brother, Evan. Or you were supposed to have a brother. I don't know exactly. Nobody really knows. It was all kept so quiet. The world tilted sideways. What are you talking about? I'm an only child. I've always been an only child. That's what everyone was told to say, Mrs. Henderson whispered. But there was another boy. Before you. Or maybe at the same time. The timing never made sense to me. Your parents took in a child, foster care, I think, or some kind of emergency placement through the church. It was early 1998, maybe late 1997. The boy was very young, 3 or 4 years old. They kept him hidden, mostly. I only saw him a handful of times, playing in the backyard. Evan's legs felt weak. He sat back down heavily. What happened to him? He died. The words came out flat, factual, devastating. That's all anyone would say. There was a funeral, very small, very private. And then he was just gone. Like he'd never existed. Your parents never spoke about him again. And then a few months later, they had you. Had me? What does that mean? I wasn't born a few months after 1998. I was born in 1994. Mrs. Henderson's expression was anguished, confused. I know what the records say, Evan. But I also know what I saw. You showed up in this house in late 1998. A little boy, maybe 4 years old. The same age Lucas had been. Your parents said you'd been away, staying with relatives, but that never made sense because I'd never seen you before that. Never. And when you came back, if you even were the same child who'd been here before, you didn't remember anything. You called them Mom and Dad like it was the first time you'd learned the words. Evan couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, the walls closing in. That's impossible. You're saying I replaced him? That I'm not, that they're not. I'm saying I don't know, Evan. Mrs. Henderson moved toward the door, desperate to escape. I'm saying there are questions nobody in this town wanted to ask, and answers nobody wanted to hear. Your parents were good people. Everyone loved them. So we all just accepted the story we were told. But late at night, when they were arguing about the boy and the truth. She paused at the door, one hand on the knob. I think they've been carrying a terrible secret for 27 years. And maybe it finally killed them. She left before Evan could respond, practically running down the porch steps to her house across the street. He watched through the window as she disappeared inside and immediately pulled all her curtains closed, shutting him out, shutting out the truth that was starting to claw its way into the light. Evan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, check your car. Front seat. You need to see this before you go any further. No name. No explanation. With trembling hands, Evan walked outside into the cold morning air. His car sat in the driveway exactly where he'd left it. The driver's side door was unlocked, had he forgotten to lock it, or had someone? On the front seat lay a single piece of paper. A funeral receipt from Evergreen Memorial, dated March 15, 1998. The deceased's name had been scraped off the paper with something sharp, leaving only torn fibers and a hole where the identity should have been. But the person responsible for payment was listed clearly, Thomas Callahan. At the bottom, in pencil, someone had written 3 words, "You were him." The funeral receipt sat on Evan's kitchen table like a live grenade. You were him. 3 words that threatened to detonate everything he thought he knew about his existence. He'd read them so many times the pencil marks were starting to smudge from the oils on his fingers. You were him. You were Lucas. You were the boy who died. Except he wasn't dead. He was sitting here, breathing, heart pounding, very much alive. Unless nothing about his life was what it seemed. At 9 a.m., Evan called the Millersville Municipal Cemetery. A cheerful voice answered on the 3rd ring. Millersville Memorial Park, this is Diane speaking. How may I help you? Evan's throat was so tight he could barely speak. Hi, yes, I need to request records for a funeral that took place in March 1998. I have a receipt but the deceased's name has been damaged. Oh, certainly. We can pull those records for you. Can you hold for just a moment? Muzak filled the line, an instrumental version of What a Wonderful World that felt like a cruel joke. Diane came back 3 minutes later. Okay, I'm ready. What's the date on that receipt? March 15, 1998. The sound of typing, then a long pause. That's odd. Evan's pulse quickened. What's odd? Well, we do have a burial recorded for that date, but the digital file seems to be corrupted. The name field is completely blank. And the physical record, more typing. The physical record appears to be missing from our archives. We have a notation here that it was pulled for review in 2015 but never returned to the filing system. Who pulled it? It doesn't say. I'm sorry, Mr. Callahan. Evan Callahan. And the person who paid for the funeral, does that information still exist? Let me check. A pause. Yes, that's still here. Payment was made by Thomas Callahan. Is that a relative of yours? My father. He died last week. Diane's voice softened immediately. Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. Would you like to come in? Sometimes these older records have additional information in the hard copy files that didn't get digitized. I can have our archivist check the basement storage. We keep everything down there, even the documents that aren't in the main system anymore. Evan was already grabbing his keys. I can be there in 15 minutes. The cemetery office was a small brick building near the entrance gates, surrounded by snow-covered headstones that marched in neat rows toward the tree line. Inside, it smelled like old paper and instant coffee. Diane turned out to be a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a University of Pittsburgh sweatshirt. She shook Evan's hand warmly. I've got Bill down in the archives right now looking for that file. He's been our record keeper for 30 years, if anyone can find it, he can. She gestured to a chair. Can I get you some coffee while you wait? No, thank you. Evan couldn't sit. He paced the small waiting area, studying the photographs on the walls, cemetery views from different decades, the evolution of Millersville Memorial from a simple country graveyard to the sprawling park it was now. The door to the basement stairwell opened, and an elderly man emerged, carrying a cardboard file box covered in dust. His expression was troubled. Diane, we've got a problem. Evan rushed over. Did you find the record? Bill set the box on Diane's desk and wiped his hands on his work pants. Found where it should be. But the file's been vandalized. Someone took scissors to it. He opened the box and pulled out a manila folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a death certificate, but it had been systematically destroyed. The name of the deceased had been cut out entirely, leaving a rectangular hole. The date of birth was gone. The cause of death was gone. The only information remaining was the date of death, March 12, 1998, and the name of the person who'd claimed the body, Thomas Callahan. This is deliberate, Bill said, his voice grave. Someone wanted to erase this child from existence. Evan's hands shook as he examined the mutilated document. What about the burial plot? Can you tell me where the grave is? Diane typed quickly. Plot 447, Section C. It's marked as. She frowned. It's marked as infant, no marker. That's unusual for 1998. By then, even indigent burials typically got some kind of identification. Can you show me where it is? 5 minutes later, Evan stood in Section C, Plot 447, staring at a patch of snow-covered ground that looked exactly like every other patch of snow-covered ground. No headstone. No marker. No indication that anyone was buried here at all. If Diane hadn't brought him directly to the spot, he never would have found it. I'm so sorry, Diane said quietly. This must be incredibly difficult. Evan knelt in the snow, his jeans soaking through immediately, and brushed away the white powder with his bare hands. The ground beneath was frozen solid, revealing nothing. Somewhere under here, 6 feet down, was a child who might or might not be named Lucas. A child his father had paid to bury. A child who'd been erased from every record, every document, every memory except the ones his parents had taken to their graves. Who would do this? Evan asked, not really expecting an answer. Who would destroy these records? That's what I'd like to know, said a voice behind them. Evan turned to see a middle-aged man in a cemetery maintenance uniform approaching, carrying a pair of hedge trimmers. Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. You asking about the missing files? You know about them? The maintenance worker nodded, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Name's Rick Porter. I've worked here 15 years. About 2 weeks ago, someone broke into the office after hours. Didn't take any money or equipment. Just messed with the basement archives. Bill and Diane didn't want to make a big deal out of it because nothing valuable was stolen, but I saw the security footage before they erased it. You saw who did it? Not their face. They wore a hoodie and kept their head down. But here's the weird part, they knew exactly where they were going. Went straight to the basement, straight to the 1998 files, did what they needed to do, and left. Took maybe 10 minutes total. That's not someone randomly vandalizing. That's someone on a mission. Evan's mind raced. 2 weeks ago. Right before his parents died. Did you report this to the police? Rick shrugged. Diane called it in, but since nothing was stolen, they didn't prioritize it. Figured it was just kids messing around. But it wasn't kids. Someone had known his parents were about to die, or were about to tell the truth, and they'd moved to destroy the evidence first. Someone who didn't want Evan to find out about Lucas. Back in his car, Evan's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered, his voice sharp. Who is this? Silence. Then breathing. Heavy, labored breathing that sent chills down his spine. Hello. Who is this? A whisper, barely audible, stop looking. The voice was distorted, mechanical, impossible to identify as male or female. Stop looking or you'll end up like them. The line went dead. Evan sat frozen, the phone pressed against his ear, listening to dial tone. A threat. Someone was threatening him. Someone who knew what he was investigating. Someone who knew about Lucas. He drove back to his parents' house with his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror, paranoia creeping up his spine like spider legs. The street looked normal, Mrs. Henderson's curtains were still closed, the mailman was making his rounds, a dog barked somewhere in the distance. Normal. Except nothing was normal anymore. The front door was exactly as he'd left it. Locked. But when he opened it and stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air was different. Disturbed. Someone had been here. In the living room, the photographs of Lucas that he'd left on the coffee table had been moved. Not taken, just rearranged. Placed in a specific pattern. It took Evan a moment to realize they were in chronological order, youngest to oldest, forming a timeline of Lucas's short life. And on top of the final photo, the one of Lucas in the blue coat by the Christmas tree, someone had placed the blue sock from the garage. But Evan had left that sock in his car. He was certain of it. He'd put it in the glove compartment for safekeeping. Heart hammering, he ran outside and checked the car. The glove compartment hung open. Empty. Someone had taken his keys. No, wait, his keys were still in his pocket. Someone had broken into his car and taken the sock just to bring it back inside and leave it as a message. We can get to you whenever we want. Evan stumbled back into the house and locked every door, every window, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the latches. His phone rang again. Another unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him press the green button. Stop calling me, he snarled. Evan. A woman's voice, elderly, frightened. Evan, it's your Aunt Patricia. Your mother's sister. I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry, honey. Evan's anger deflated. Aunt Patricia. God, I'm sorry. I thought you were, never mind. Evan, I need to talk to you about your mother. About something that happened a long time ago. Something she made me promise never to tell you. Her voice cracked. But now that she's gone, I think you deserve to know the truth. The truth about Lucas? The sharp intake of breath on the other end told him everything. How do you know that name? I found his picture. Aunt Patricia, please. Who was he? A long, terrible silence. Then, I can't do this over the phone. Can you meet me? There's a diner outside Lancaster, about an hour from you. Bernie's Pancake House. I'll be there at 2 o'clock. I'll be there. But when Evan arrived at Bernie's Pancake House at 1:55 p.m., Aunt Patricia was already gone. The waitress said an older woman matching her description had sat at a booth for 20 minutes, then received a phone call and ran out, like the devil was chasing her, leaving her untouched coffee and a scribbled note. The note said, "They're watching. I can't help you. I'm sorry. Destroy everything you found and forget about Lucas. Please, Evan. For your own safety. Your mother would want you to live." Evan sat in the parking lot of Bernie's Pancake House for 20 minutes, staring at his aunt's note until the words blurred together. Destroy everything you found and forget about Lucas. As if he could. As if he could unknow what he'd learned, unsee the photographs, unhear Mrs. Henderson's words, "You were supposed to have a brother." As if he could ignore the growing, terrible suspicion that his entire life was a carefully constructed lie. The rational part of his brain, the part that had gotten him through engineering school, through divorce, through single parenthood, told him to listen to Aunt Patricia. Pack up the photographs, burn the documents, go back to his life and pretend none of this had happened. But the part of him that had always felt slightly out of place in his own skin, the part that had always sensed something missing without knowing what, refused to let go. He drove back to Millersville as the afternoon light faded to that particular shade of winter gray that made everything look two-dimensional, like a photograph slowly losing its color. The decision crystallized as he pulled into the driveway of 847, Maple Street. He would search the house one more time. Methodically. Room by room. If someone was watching him, let them watch. If someone wanted to stop him, they'd have to do it to his face. The house felt different at night. Evan hadn't been inside after dark since he was a teenager, and the familiar spaces had transformed into something foreign and slightly menacing. Shadows pooled in corners. The heating system made sounds he didn't remember, creaks and groans and the occasional bang that made him jump. He turned on every light on the first floor, flooding the house with brightness that felt like armor against the gathering dark outside. He'd already searched the obvious places, his parents' bedroom, the living room, the garage. But there was one room he'd been avoiding, the room that had always given him an inexplicable sense of unease even as a child, the guest bedroom on the second floor, at the end of the hallway. The door stuck when he tried to open it, the wood swollen from years of humidity and neglect. Evan put his shoulder into it, and it finally gave with a protesting squeal. The room beyond was dark, musty, and considerably colder than the rest of the house. His breath formed small clouds as he stepped inside and found the light switch. The overhead bulb flickered to life, revealing a space that looked like it had been frozen in time, and then hastily dismantled. The walls were a faded yellow, water-stained in places. The carpet showed deep indentations where furniture had once stood, creating a map of a room that no longer existed. A child's room, Evan realized with a jolt. The indentations were too small for adult furniture. A small bed. A dresser. A toy chest. He knelt beside the carpet, running his hand over the compressed fibers. How long would it take for these marks to form? Years. And how long would they last after the furniture was removed? More years. This room had been set up for a child, occupied by a child, and then stripped bare, but not recently. This had happened a long time ago. In the closet, hanging from a single bent hanger, was a tiny jacket. Evan's hand trembled as he reached for it, already knowing what color it would be. Light blue. With wooden buttons. The same jacket Lucas wore in the Christmas photograph. But this one was real, three-dimensional, worn soft with use. The sleeves were faded at the cuffs where small hands had rubbed against them. One of the buttons was loose, hanging by a thread. Evan pressed the jacket to his face and inhaled. It smelled like old fabric and dust, but underneath that, something else. Something that stirred a memory he didn't know he had, a scent that was simultaneously foreign and achingly familiar. Laundry detergent. Childhood. Home. He was shaking now, tears running down his face without permission. This was Lucas's room. This was where a little boy had lived and slept and played. This was where Evan's parents had kept a child they'd later erased from history. And the room felt sad, not scary. Abandoned. Mourned. Behind the door, Evan found something that made his breath catch. Carved into the wall, low down where a small child would reach, were words scratched into the paint with something sharp: Lucas was here. The letters were uneven, childish, the S backward. Below that, in different handwriting, adult handwriting he recognized as his mother's, someone had written, "Forgive me." The same words from the funeral home wall. "Forgive me." Evan sat down hard on the floor, his back against the wall, Lucas's jacket still clutched in his hands. The room seemed to press in on him, heavy with secrets and sorrow. How many nights had a little boy spent here? How many times had he looked at these yellow walls, these windows that faced the backyard? How had he died? The floorboards creaked in the hallway outside. Evan's head snapped up. Hello. Silence. Then another creak, closer this time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching the guest room. His heart hammered against his ribs. He scrambled to his feet, looking for something to use as a weapon. The closet rod. His phone, he should call 911. His hands fumbled for his phone, but before he could pull it from his pocket, the footsteps stopped directly outside the door. The lights in the hallway went out with a decisive click. Who's there? Evan's voice came out stronger than he felt. I know someone's there. I've already called the police. A lie, but maybe it would scare them off. A soft sound reached him through the darkness, like someone crying. No, not crying. Laughing. Someone was laughing in his parents' house in the middle of the night. The laughter stopped abruptly. Then a voice, barely audible, "You shouldn't be here." It wasn't the mechanical voice from the phone. This was real, human, and terrifyingly close. Evan grabbed the closet rod, yanking it free from its brackets with a screech of metal on metal. "Show yourself," he demanded, stepping toward the doorway with the rod held in front of him like a sword. The overhead light in the guest room flickered. Once. Twice. And in those brief flashes of illumination, Evan saw a shadow move across the hallway, impossibly tall, impossibly thin. Then the light steadied, and there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway, the darkness at the top of the stairs, and the sound of the front door downstairs slamming shut. Evan ran. He flew down the stairs, taking them three at a time, the closet rod abandoned on the landing. The front door was indeed standing open, cold air pouring into the house. He stumbled outside onto the porch, looking frantically in every direction. The street was empty. No car. No person running away. Nothing but parked vehicles and the yellow glow of streetlights on snow. But on the porch, right in front of the door, someone had left something. Evan knelt down, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grasp it. A small wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with a piece of paper taped to the lid. The paper had 3 words written in that same mechanical print: "Stop or join them." Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, were items that made Evan's stomach lurch. Lucas's other sock, the matching pair to the one he'd found in the garage. A child's toothbrush. A lock of blonde hair tied with a blue ribbon. And underneath it all, a photograph Evan had never seen before. It showed two boys, identical in every way, standing side by side in the backyard of 847, Maple Street. Same blonde hair. Same face. Same blue eyes. They couldn't have been more than 4 years old. They were holding hands, both wearing matching blue jackets with wooden buttons. Evan's vision blurred. His ears rang. Because he recognized one of those boys. He recognized him from every childhood photograph in his parents' house, from every school picture, from every memory he had of being young. That boy was him. Which meant the other boy, identical in every way, was Lucas. They weren't brothers. They were twins. The diary entry he found next, tucked beneath the photograph, confirmed what his heart already knew. His mother's handwriting, dated January 15, 1998, "The doctors say both boys are healthy, but we can only afford to keep one. Thomas says we have to choose. I can't choose between my own children. I can't. God forgive me, I can't." The next entry was dated March 1, 1998, "We tried to keep them both. We tried so hard. But Lucas kept getting sick, and the medical bills. Thomas says there's a family who will take him. A good family. We'll be able to visit. This isn't goodbye forever." The final entry was dated March 12, 1998, written in shaking letters, "He's gone. Lucas is gone. The family never existed. It was a lie. They took him, and he died, and it's our fault. It's all our fault. Thomas says we have to forget, we have to protect Evan, we have to pretend Lucas never existed. But how can I forget my own child? How can I forget that I chose one son over the other?" Evan sat on the frozen porch of his parents' house, holding evidence of a twin brother he never knew existed, and screamed into the night until his voice gave out. Evan didn't remember going back inside the house. He didn't remember climbing the stairs or walking into his old childhood bedroom. But when dawn broke through the curtains, painting everything in shades of pale gray and gold, he found himself curled on his old twin bed, still wearing his jacket and shoes, the photograph of two identical boys clutched against his chest like a lifeline. A twin. He'd had a twin brother named Lucas. And his parents had given him away. No, worse than that. According to his mother's diary, they'd given Lucas to people who were supposed to be a good family, but those people never existed. It was a lie. Someone had taken Lucas under false pretenses, and Lucas had died. At 4 years old. The same age Evan would have been. The implications were too enormous, too devastating to fully process. His entire identity was fractured. Every memory, every birthday, every only child moment was now colored by the ghost of a brother he'd never known. Had he sensed it somehow? Was that why he'd always felt incomplete, like a puzzle with a missing piece? Evan's phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, another threat, another warning, another person trying to bury the truth. But the caller ID showed a number he recognized, Diane from the cemetery office. "Hello." His voice was hoarse from screaming the night before. "Mr. Callahan. I hope I'm not calling too early. It's just, Bill found something else in the archives. Something I think you need to see right away." 20 minutes later, Evan sat in the cemetery office, freshly showered but feeling no cleaner, as Bill spread documents across Diane's desk with the careful reverence of someone handling historical artifacts. Which, in a way, they were. Artifacts of a life erased. "I couldn't stop thinking about that vandalized file," Bill said, adjusting his reading glasses. "So I went through our backup records, the ones we keep in the off-site storage facility. Nobody even remembers these exist anymore. They're from before we digitized everything." He pulled out a photocopy of a death certificate, this one intact. "This is your boy." Evan's hands shook as he took the paper. Name, Lucas Callahan. Date of birth, April 23, 1994. Date of death, March 12, 1998. Age, 3 years, 11 months. Cause of death, acute respiratory failure secondary to pneumonia. But it was the section labeled "Additional Information" that made Evan's blood run cold. In the space where next of kin or guardians should be listed, someone had typed, "Child was in temporary custody of unregistered foster placement. Investigation pending. See attached police report." There's a police report? Evan's voice barely rose above a whisper. Bill's expression was grim. There was. According to our records, it was filed by Detective Sarah Brennan, now retired. But when I called the police department this morning to request a copy, they said the case file is sealed. Won't tell me why. Won't tell me who sealed it. Just that it's classified as sensitive and requires a court order to access. Can you tell me anything else about the burial? Evan stared at the death certificate, at his brother's name printed in official black ink. Proof. Undeniable proof that Lucas had existed. Diane leaned forward. Actually, that's the other strange thing. When we pulled the original burial paperwork from off-site storage, we found a notation that the plot was visited regularly for about 2 years after the interment. Someone left flowers every week. Always the same day, Sundays. Always blue flowers, cornflowers, specifically. And then suddenly, in March 2000, the visit stopped completely. Who was leaving the flowers? The log doesn't specify. Just says, family member. But Mr. Callahan, your father's payment records show something else interesting. He didn't just pay for the burial. He paid for perpetual care of the plot, meaning the cemetery was supposed to maintain it indefinitely. That's a significant expense. People don't do that for someone they're trying to forget. Evan's throat tightened. His father had paid to keep Lucas's grave maintained forever, even while erasing him from every other record. Even while pretending he'd never existed. It was a contradiction that hurt to contemplate, love and shame tangled together so completely they became indistinguishable. I need to see Detective Brennan, Evan said. Can you give me her contact information? Bill and Diane exchanged glances. We can't officially give out personal information, Bill said carefully. But I can tell you that Sarah Brennan retired in 2015 and moved to a small town called Foxburg, about 2 hours north of here. Runs a bed and breakfast called the River's Edge Inn. Lovely place, from what I hear. Evan was already standing. Thank you. Both of you. You have no idea what this means to me. Back in his car, Evan pulled up the photograph of the 2 boys on his phone. He'd taken a picture of it before leaving the house that morning. 2 identical faces stared back at him. Which one was he? Which one was Lucas? There was no way to tell them apart. In this moment, frozen in time, they were the same person. 2 halves of a whole that should never have been split. His phone rang. Another unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Callahan. The voice was different this time, older, weary, distinctly female. My name is Sarah Brennan. I hear you've been looking for information about Lucas Callahan. Evan's heart stopped. Detective Brennan? How did you? Bill from the cemetery called me. He's an old friend. Mr. Callahan, before you come all the way to Foxburg, there are things you need to understand. Things that will change how you see your parents, your life, everything. Are you sure you want to know? Yes. The word came out fierce, unequivocal. I need to know everything. A long sigh on the other end. Then come to the inn. But come alone. Don't tell anyone where you're going. And Mr. Callahan? Bring the photograph. The one of the 2 boys together. You're going to need it. The drive to Foxburg passed in a blur of snow-covered farmland and small towns that looked like they'd been forgotten by time. Evan's mind churned with possibilities, each more terrible than the last. What had happened to Lucas? Who were these people who'd taken him? And why was it all so deeply buried? The river's edge and sat on a bluff overlooking the Allegheny River, a rambling Victorian structure painted cheerful yellow with white trim. Under different circumstances, it might have seemed welcoming. Today, it felt like a gateway to truths Evan wasn't sure he could survive knowing. Sarah Brennan met him at the door. She was in her 70s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much human ugliness. She studied Evan's face for a long moment, and something in her expression crumpled. "My God," she whispered. "You look just like him. Exactly like him." She led him to a private sitting room and closed the door. On the coffee table sat a file folder, worn and faded, marked, "Confidential," in red letters. "I kept a copy," she said, sitting down heavily. "Against regulations. But I couldn't let it disappear completely. Not after what I saw." She opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Evan's vision swim. "Your brother didn't die of pneumonia, Mr. Callahan. That's what the death certificate says, but it's a lie." The photographs showed a small body on a medical examiner's table. Bruises. Marks. Signs of trauma that Evan's mind couldn't fully process. "Lucas was murdered," Detective Brennan said flatly. "By the people your parents gave him to. People who ran an illegal adoption ring, selling children to the highest bidder. Your parents thought they were giving him to a loving family who could afford better medical care than they could. Instead, they gave him to monsters." The room tilted. Evan gripped the arms of his chair to keep from falling. Why? Why would anyone? Money. Always money. The ring operated for years, taking children from desperate parents, forging documents, selling the kids to wealthy couples who didn't want to wait for legal adoptions. Her voice was hard, clinical, but her hands shook. "We broke it up in 1998, but not before Lucas died. He'd been with them for maybe 10 days. 10 days was all it took. And my parents never knew what they'd really done until it was too late. When we contacted them to testify against the ring, your mother had a complete breakdown. Your father refused to cooperate. He said testifying would mean admitting publicly that they'd given their son away, that they'd chosen one twin over the other. The shame would destroy your family. So he made a deal." "What kind of deal?" Detective Brennan's eyes were filled with old anger and older sadness. "He agreed to seal the records, to never speak of Lucas again, in exchange for the case being classified as sensitive. The prosecutors didn't want the publicity anyway. It made them look bad that the ring had operated for so long under their noses. Everyone got what they wanted. Except Lucas. And except you, growing up never knowing you had a brother." She pulled out one final photograph. Recent, taken on a cell phone. It showed the back of a car driving away from a house at night. The license plate was visible. "Someone from that adoption ring is still out there," she said. "Someone who's been watching your family for 27 years, making sure the truth stayed buried. When your parents started arguing about telling you the truth, and believe me, neighbors heard them, word got around, that someone decided to take action. I can't prove your parents were murdered, Mr. Callahan. But I don't believe in coincidences." Evan stared at the license plate in the photograph, his mind reeling with implications he couldn't quite grasp. Who's watching me? "That," Detective Brennan said, "is what we need to find out. Before they decide you know too much to live." The license plate number burned itself into Evan's memory, KLX 4739. Pennsylvania plates, old style, the kind that hadn't been issued since the early 2000s. Detective Brennan had traced it to a 1997 Honda Accord registered to a shell corporation that dissolved in 2016, leaving no forwarding information. A dead end that felt deliberately constructed. "Someone's been very careful," Brennan said, refilling Evan's untouched coffee cup. "But careful people make mistakes when they're scared. And right now, whoever this is, they're terrified you're going to expose them." Evan couldn't stop staring at the photographs of Lucas's body. His mind kept trying to reconcile the smiling boy in a blue jacket with these clinical images of trauma and death. His twin. His other half. Murdered while Evan lived on, oblivious. "I need to go back," Evan said suddenly. "To the funeral home. Gerald Hobbs, the funeral director, he saw the photograph in my father's casket. He reacted like he recognized it. Like he knew something." Brennan's expression sharpened. "Gerald Hobbs has been running Evergreen Memorial since 1995. He would have handled Lucas's cremation." She pulled out a notepad, her detective instincts clearly not dimmed by retirement. What exactly did he do when he saw the photograph? He panicked. Closed the casket immediately. Said he'd never seen the picture before, but he was lying. I could see it in his face. Evan stood, adrenaline cutting through his exhaustion. And there was something else. Scratch marks on the inside of my father's casket lid. Fresh marks. Gerald said that shouldn't be possible on a body that's been dead for days. "It's not possible," Brennan said flatly. "Unless someone opened that casket after your father was embalmed and placed something inside, or took something out." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Someone had tampered with his father's body. Someone had access to the funeral home. Someone like Gerald Hobbs. 40 minutes later, Evan pulled into the parking lot of Evergreen Memorial Funeral Home just as the winter sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The building looked different now, less like a place of mourning and more like a repository of secrets. Detective Brennan had insisted on coming with him, her presence both comforting and terrifying. If she thought this warranted backup, how dangerous was it really? The front door was locked, a "closed" sign hanging in the window. But lights glowed in the back of the building, and through the frosted glass, Evan could see movement. "He's here," Evan said. "Working late." Brennan tried the door. Locked. She knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the evening quiet. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then footsteps approached, and Gerald Hobbs's face appeared in the window. When he saw Evan, all color drained from his features. He opened the door but kept the security chain engaged. "Mr. Callahan. We're closed. If you need to arrange additional services." "I need to talk to you about Lucas," Evan said. "About the boy in the photograph. The one you recognized." Gerald's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Brennan said, stepping forward. Her voice carried the weight of decades of interrogations. "I'm former Detective Sarah Brennan, Pennsylvania State Police. I investigated Lucas Callahan's death in 1998. You handled his cremation. You also handled Thomas and Margaret Callahan's cremations last week. That's a lot of coincidences, Mr. Hobbs." Gerald's hands trembled on the doorframe. "I need you to leave." "Did you put the photograph in my father's casket?" Evan pressed. "Or did you take something out? The scratch marks on the inside, you know what caused them, don't you? Please." Gerald's voice cracked. "Please, I have a family. I have grandchildren. I can't." "Can't what?" "Can't tell the truth about a murdered child. Can't explain why you've been helping cover up a crime for 27 years. Brennan's tone was sharp as broken glass. Gerald's resistance crumbled. His shoulders sagged, and he unhooked the security chain with shaking fingers. "Come in. Quickly. Before someone sees." Inside, the funeral home was dimly lit, the air heavy with the chemical sweetness of embalming fluid and fresh flowers. Gerald led them to his office, a cramped room lined with filing cabinets and photographs of the deceased, a wall of strangers whose final arrangements he'd handled. He collapsed into his desk chair and put his head in his hands. "I didn't know," he said, his voice muffled. "In 1998, when they brought Lucas in, I didn't know he'd been murdered. The death certificate said pneumonia. The body showed signs consistent with respiratory illness. I had no reason to question it. But you found out later, Brennan said. Gerald nodded miserably. About 6 months after Lucas's cremation, a man came to see me. He said his name was Richard Voss. He worked for Child Protective Services, or so he claimed. He showed me credentials, official-looking documents. He said Lucas's case was part of a larger investigation into child welfare fraud, and he needed to ensure all records were properly secured. Secured, Evan repeated. You mean destroyed? He paid me. The confession came out as barely a whisper. $10,000 to lose Lucas's cremation records, to forget I'd ever handled the case. I was young, drowning in business debt from taking over the funeral home from my father. The money saved me from bankruptcy. So I took it. God help me, I took it. And Richard Voss? Brennan had her notepad out, writing rapidly. I never heard from him again. Until last month. Gerald looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. He called me out of the blue. Said Thomas Callahan was asking questions, getting sentimental in his old age, talking about confessing. Richard said I needed to be ready to handle the situation when the time came. Evan's blood ran cold. Handle it how? He wanted me to make sure the photograph in Thomas's casket disappeared before anyone saw it. He said it was evidence of the adoption ring, that if it came to light, everyone involved would be exposed, including me. I was supposed to remove it during the viewing, destroy it, and report back that everything was clean. But you didn't, Evan said. I found the photograph. Gerald's laugh was bitter, broken. I tried. I went to remove it during the preparation, but when I opened Thomas's jacket to take it out. He paused, struggling with the memory. His hand was still warm. Not body temperature, but warmer than it should have been. And his fingers, they'd curled around the photograph like he was trying to protect it even in death. I tried to pull it free, and that's when I saw his other hand move. Move? Evan's skepticism warred with growing horror. That's impossible. I know what I saw, Gerald insisted. His fingers scratched at the casket lid. Just once, but hard enough to leave marks. The medical examiner said it was post-mortem muscle contractions, a rare but documented phenomenon. But Mr. Callahan, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never seen anything like it. It was like your father was fighting death itself to keep that photograph with him. The room fell silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. Evan thought of his father, dying while arguing with his mother, fighting to reveal the truth even as his heart gave out. Had he put the photograph in his own pocket? Had he known he was dying and made sure Evan would find it? There's more, Gerald said. Richard Voss called me again. Yesterday. He said you were getting too close, asking too many questions. He told me to give you a message. What message? Gerald opened his desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope, handling it like it might explode. He brought this by last night. Said to make sure you received it. I was going to deliver it tomorrow, but since you're here. Evan took the envelope with numb fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Evan Callahan, you have 48 hours to stop your investigation and destroy all evidence you've collected. If you do not comply, we will ensure your daughter Mia has the same accident her uncle Lucas had. Children are so fragile at age 7. It would be a tragedy. But preventable. The choice is yours. The paper slipped from Evan's hands and floated to the floor. Mia. They were threatening Mia. His little girl, who still believed in Santa Claus and thought her biggest problem was memorizing multiplication tables. They were threatening to murder his daughter. Where is Mia right now? Brennan's voice cut through Evan's panic. With her mother. In Pittsburgh. Safe. She's safe. But was she? How much did these people know about his life? How closely were they watching? Brennan pulled out her phone. "Give me your ex-wife's number. Right now. We need to get Mia into protective custody immediately." As Evan recited the number with shaking voice, Gerald spoke up again. "There's one more thing. The cremation. When I cremated Lucas in 1998, Richard Voss was there. He watched the whole process. And when it was over, he asked me to give him some of the ashes." "What?" Evan's attention snapped back to Gerald. "Why would he want Lucas's ashes?" "I don't know. I thought maybe he was taking them to the family, but when I suggested that, he laughed. He said the ashes were insurance. That they proved Lucas Callahan had existed and died, and if anyone ever tried to rewrite history, he had physical evidence. I thought it was strange, but by then I was too deep in it to ask questions." Brennan's expression was grim. "He kept them as blackmail material. Proof against your parents if they ever tried to expose the adoption ring. And now," she looked at Evan. "Now someone's weaponizing your brother's death all over again to keep you silent." Evan thought of the wooden box left on his porch, the items inside, Lucas's sock, his toothbrush, a lock of his hair. Mementos taken from a dead child and preserved for decades. Not out of love or remembrance, but as tools of manipulation and fear. "I need that envelope traced," Brennan was saying into her phone. "Fingerprints, DNA, whatever you can get. And I need surveillance on." She rattled off an address in Pittsburgh, presumably where Mia was staying. But Evan was no longer listening. He was staring at the wall of deceased faces in Gerald's office, and one photograph had caught his attention. An older man, maybe 70, with thin gray hair and cold blue eyes. The nameplate beneath read, "Richard Voss, 1947 to 2023. Beloved father and community servant." "Gerald," Evan's voice was hollow. "When did Richard Voss die?" Gerald followed his gaze to the photograph. "Last February. Heart attack. I handled his funeral myself." "Why?" "Because," Evan said slowly, ice spreading through his veins, "if Richard Voss is dead, then who the hell has been threatening me?" The photograph of Richard Voss stared back at Evan with dead eyes, the kind of expression that revealed nothing and everything at once. Gerald Hobbs stood frozen beside his desk, his face the color of old newspaper, while Detective Brennan worked her phone with the urgency of someone who just realized they'd been chasing a ghost. "His son," Gerald whispered, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. "Richard had a son. David. I met him at the funeral. He helped arrange everything, paid in cash, kept to himself. I remember thinking it was odd. Richard had supposedly been so involved in child services, so beloved in the community, but only a handful of people came to his funeral. And David." He paused, searching his memory. David looked just like him. Same height, same build, same cold way of looking at people like they were problems to be solved rather than human beings. Brennan ended her call and turned to them, her retired detective facade cracking to reveal something raw beneath. "I just spoke to a contact at state police. Richard Voss never worked for Child Protective Services. He was a lawyer, specifically, he handled private adoptions. Legal ones, supposedly, but there were always rumors. Several complaints filed against him in the 90s for pressuring vulnerable mothers to give up their children. Nothing that stuck, but enough smoke that people noticed. And his son?" Evan could barely get the words out. His hands were still shaking from the threat against Mia, his mind fragmenting between rage and terror. "David Voss. 43 years old. Also a lawyer, took over his father's practice when Richard semi-retired in 2010. The practice closed after Richard died, and David disappeared. No forwarding address, no active phone number, no digital footprint. It's like he evaporated. Or went underground," Evan said. Because he knew someone would eventually start asking questions. The pieces were assembling themselves into a picture so horrific Evan could barely look at it directly. An illegal adoption ring. A lawyer who facilitated it. A murdered child who was inconvenient evidence. And now, 27 years later, a son carrying on his father's work of silence and intimidation. "We need to find David Voss," Brennan said. "Now." Before. Her phone rang. She answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and her face went white. "When?" "Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm on my way." She hung up and grabbed her coat. "That was Pittsburgh PD. Your ex-wife's apartment building. There's been an incident." Evan's heart stopped. "Mia. She's fine. She's safe. But someone tried to break into your ex-wife's apartment 20 minutes ago. A neighbor scared them off, and building security called the police. Your ex-wife is hysterical, and Mia's asking for you." They were in Brennan's car before Evan consciously decided to move, the funeral home disappearing in the rearview mirror as they accelerated onto the highway. Evan called his ex-wife, Lauren, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Evan, oh my God, Evan," Lauren's voice was fractured, barely holding together. "Someone tried to break in. They had a key, Evan. They had a key to my apartment." "How did they have a key? Is Mia okay? Let me talk to her. She's scared." She heard the door handle rattling, heard someone trying to get in. "She came running to my room and," Lauren's voice broke completely. "What's happening? Why would someone target us?" "I'll explain everything when I get there. Just don't let Mia out of your sight. Lock every door and window. I'm 40 minutes away." "Daddy?" Mia's small voice came through the phone, and Evan's chest cracked open. "Daddy, are you coming home?" "I'm coming right now, sweetheart. You're safe. Mommy's with you, and the police are there. I need you to be brave for just a little longer, okay? There was a bad man at the door." Mia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw him through the peephole. He looked angry. Did you see his face?" "Mommy said not to look, but I did anyway. He had gray hair like Grandpa's. And he was holding something." "What was he holding, Mia?" "A picture. Of a little boy. A little boy who looked like you, Daddy." Evan's vision blurred. David Voss had gone to his daughter's apartment with a photograph of Lucas. A warning. A promise. This is what happened to the last child who got in our way. The drive to Pittsburgh was an eternity compressed into 40 minutes. Brennan made call after call, pulling in favors from her years on the force, arranging protection, coordinating with local police. But Evan could barely hear her over the roaring in his ears. They'd come for Mia. They'd actually come for his little girl. When they finally arrived at Lauren's apartment building, 3 police cars were parked outside, lights silent but present. An officer escorted them up to the 4th floor, where Lauren stood in her doorway, wrapped in a blanket despite the building's heating, her eyes red from crying. "Evan," she fell into his arms, and he held her, this woman he'd once loved and married and divorced, united now by terror for their daughter. "Where's Mia?" "Inside. Playing with her dolls. She's pretending everything's normal, but I can see she's scared." Lauren pulled back, studying his face. "What's really going on?" "The police asked if I knew anyone who might want to hurt us, and I couldn't think of anyone. But you know, don't you? You know who did this." Before Evan could answer, a uniformed officer approached. "Mr. Callahan. We pulled the security footage from the hallway camera. You're going to want to see this." The footage showed a man in his 40s, tall and lean with graying blonde hair, wearing a dark coat and gloves. He walked directly to Lauren's door with the confidence of someone who belonged there, inserted a key that didn't work. The locks had been changed a month ago, Lauren explained, and then spent 30 seconds trying to force the door. When a neighbor opened their door down the hall, the man walked away calmly, his face partially visible in profile. "That's him," Evan said. "That's David Voss. You know this man?" The officer's hand moved toward his radio. He's a lawyer. His father ran an illegal adoption ring in the 90s. A child died, my twin brother. And now David's trying to silence anyone who might expose what his father did. The officer's expression shifted from routine concern to active alarm. Do you have proof of this? I have photographs, documents, testimonies. Detective Brennan has been helping me. Former detective, Brennan interjected. But yes, we have substantial evidence. This man is dangerous, and he's threatening a 7-year-old child to maintain his father's cover-up. Things moved quickly after that. More officers arrived. Statements were taken. Lauren's apartment was secured. And through it all, Evan sat with Mia on the couch, holding her close, feeling her small heart beat against his chest like a bird's wings. Daddy, why did the man have a picture of you when you were little? That wasn't me, sweetheart. That was my brother. You have a brother? I have an uncle. Mia's eyes went wide with the simple wonder of childhood, untainted by the horror beneath the revelation. I had a brother. A long time ago. Before you were born. Before I even knew about him. What happened to him? Evan looked into his daughter's face, so innocent, so trusting, and made a decision. He would not let Lucas be forgotten. He would not let the shame and secrecy continue into another generation. He died when he was very young. But I'm going to make sure people remember him. I'm going to make sure what happened to him never happens to another child. Later that night, after Mia had finally fallen asleep and Lauren was resting with a sedative the paramedics had provided, Evan sat with Detective Brennan in the apartment building's lobby. The police had confirmed that the key David Voss used was a copy of an old key to Lauren's apartment. Somehow he'd obtained it before the locks were changed. The level of surveillance, of planning, was chilling. We have enough now, Brennan said quietly. Attempted breaking and entering, harassment, terroristic threats. Combined with the evidence about his father's adoption ring, we can build a case. It won't bring Lucas back, but it'll bring David Voss to justice. My parents knew, Evan said, the words dragging themselves up from somewhere deep and painful. All those years, they knew Lucas had been murdered. They knew they'd handed him to monsters. And they stayed silent. They were protecting you, Brennan said gently. In their own broken way, they thought staying silent would keep you safe. They were wrong, but they were trying. The night they died, they were finally going to tell me the truth. That's why David had the cemetery records destroyed. That's why he sent threats. He knew they were breaking. And their hearts couldn't take the strain, Brennan finished. The guilt, the fear, the weight of 27 years of lies. It killed them. Evan pulled out the photograph of the two boys, him and Lucas, identical and inseparable in that frozen moment before everything went wrong. I'm going to find David Voss. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what his father did. Lucas deserves that. He deserves to be remembered. Then let's remember him properly, Brennan said. She pulled out her phone and made a call. This is Detective Sarah Brennan. I need to report new evidence in a cold case from 1998. The murder of Lucas Callahan. Yes, I said murder. And I know exactly who's responsible. As dawn broke over Pittsburgh, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that Lucas would never see, Evan held his daughter close and made a promise to a brother he'd never known: your story won't end in silence. Your life mattered. And I'll make sure the world knows it. Evan Callahan's journey forces us to confront an impossible question: what would you do if you discovered that your entire life was built on a lie meant to protect you? His parents made a choice no parent should ever have to make. They chose one son over another, believing they were giving Lucas a better life, only to condemn him to death. They carried that guilt for 27 years until it literally stopped their hearts. But were they villains or victims? Can love and betrayal exist in the same act? Evan had to decide whether to hate the parents who lied to him or honor the parents who sacrificed everything, including their own peace, to keep him safe. In the end, He chose to remember Lucas not as a secret to be ashamed of, but as a brother who deserved to be known. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let someone be forgotten. This story reminds us that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a beautiful lie. Secrets don't protect us, they imprison us. And the courage to face the past, no matter how dark, is what sets us free. Would you have kept digging like Evan did, even when it put your own child at risk? Would you have forgiven your parents for a choice that destroyed an innocent life? These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they're worth asking because they reveal who we are when everything we thought we knew turns out to be wrong. If this story moved you, made you think, or touched something deep inside, please subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us what you would have done in Evan's place. Your engagement helps us bring more powerful stories like this one to life. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth may hurt, but silence destroys.